All right, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and continue, just like I mentioned earlier, talking about the asset framework. So we talked about in the last video that an asset is one of the different kinds of content in Liferay. Okay, so what is the asset framework? What does that mean in Liferay? The asset framework is a term that we use essentially to discuss the different kinds of features you can use with the assets. This also includes APIs that developers can tie into, but for our purposes, we're just going to talk about the sort of content aspect of this. What does it actually mean? Okay, so basically the asset framework allows us to use some common features between our different kinds of content and include metadata that is going to be common between the different kinds of assets as well. Okay, so we have things like tags, categories. There are features where we can go ahead and enable comments. We can enable ratings, even flags, depending on the kind of content that you're using. All right, so we have all of these features available for all of our different kinds of content, and we can take advantage of that as we continue on, both to ensure that we have the right user experience for our users, but also to organize our content. Now, I've mentioned numerous times at this point that assets are the different kinds of content. So what do I mean by that? What kinds of content are there in Liferay? Well, there are a list of them. You can actually, if I jump over here to our newly set up site, if I open the menu, and in this section here, we'll talk about this in a bit, I open up the content section, I can actually see all of my assets that are available, okay? So things like web content, documents and media, bookmarks, blogs, okay, wikis, message boards, forms and polls. Those are all of the assets that are available to you in Liferay out of the box. And of course, developers can create new assets as needed as well, okay? Now, what we'll do in this course is we're primarily going to spend our time looking at a few of these assets, and you guys can feel free to take a look at some of the other assets in the meantime as well. All right, so we're going to start by looking at web content, documents and media, and blogs as we go through the next few chapters of videos here, okay? Now, web content is a very powerful tool. It's probably one of the most commonly used assets in Liferay, okay? And it can be used for simple text and images, or it can be a lot more advanced using what we call structures and templates, and we'll look at that a little bit later on, okay? Documents and media, as you might have already guessed, is going to be essentially a document repository that you can manage for each individual site, and we'll look into that as well, okay? Bookmarks, we're not going to look at too much here, but essentially the bookmarks that you can set on your browser, you can also do in Liferay and present it to users. So this would be for the case where you had certain links that you want to present to your users, maybe internal links or links to other sites or different things like that. You can actually set those up, you can organize them in folders, and you can present them to your users, okay? Now, blogs are going to be blogs, right? Basically, it's going to be a tool that can be used to allow your users to write up their thoughts on different topics, and it can be even used to do some pretty powerful marketing, which is done these days. So we do have a tool for that as well, and we'll look at that later in the course, okay? Now, wikis are an asset that we don't really spend any time on in this course, but it is helpful to understand what it is. It essentially allows users to collaborate on different articles together. One of the most commonly used examples of wikis, at least that I like to see, are gaming wikis, for example. You have communities that are interested in playing a particular game, and they will create a wiki for said game, and they will pool their resources and their information together and basically collaborate on a pretty robust knowledge base. So if I later on pick up that game and I want to look up certain information on where I can find this item or where I can fight this boss or any of those kinds of things, I can find it there. So these can be used for internal purposes, external purposes. A lot of businesses will use wikis to allow sort of the veterans and the newbies to interact and collaborate on information so that they can ramp up more quickly. So that is something available to you as well, okay? Additionally, there are message board assets, and these essentially allow you to set up forums where you can have users interacting on different categories and threads. They can be replying to each other, different things along those lines, okay? We also have forms. This will be something that we look at throughout the course as well. We can use a form builder tool to create some forms that we can present to our users. They can fill it out and we can gather and analyze that data. Okay, so we'll be looking at that as well. And lastly in this list, we have polls. And polls are just going to be very, very simple. They allow you to present a question with a number of answers, and users can come and give their answers, and you'll just get some quick statistics on the answers. Okay, you do actually see these kinds of polls on some of those wiki pages that I was talking about a little bit earlier. All right, so these are the different kinds of assets. So they're different kinds of content. You do different things with these different assets, and the framework allows us to organize these assets in a consistent way with folders, with metadata, and that could be tags, that could be categories, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. We can set up features like commenting and allowing them to reply and flagging content and different things like that as well. Okay, so this allows us to, as content managers, have a consistent experience across the board, and we can also present a consistent experience to our users. All right, now new to 7.1 is a new set of tools that allow us to make creating sections of our pages a lot easier. Okay, so these are called page fragments. Okay, now page fragments are typically developed by our front-end developers. Okay, it's where they can create HTML structures with CSS and JavaScript. But what they can do for us is they can actually make those pieces of our page editable. So for our marketing team or content teams, that might be you, we can basically drag these fragments on the page. Okay, we can create new pages very quickly. We call these content pages when we're using page fragments. We can create new content pages quickly, and we can edit the different aspects of those fragments. So an example of this might be a banner. Let's say the banner has an image, a heading, and some subtext. What we can do is once it's created by our developers, we can just drag that onto the page and we can edit it. And we can add our own image, and we can add our own text, and we can make it exactly what we need for the specific page we're working on, maybe even on a different site or something along those lines. Okay, so this makes for some pretty cool opportunities, and we'll go ahead and take a look at these a little bit later as well. Okay. All right, now these fragments can be created using the fragment editor. Again, that's going to be a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we can make those editable as well. So the front-end developers will have created some fragments for us. We can take advantage of those fragments, set up our pages, and edit the fragments as needed. Okay. Now something else that's new to Liferay 7.1 is going to be the way that navigation is handled. So in the past, you had essentially public pages and private pages for any site. And you just had a single page hierarchy, and there were some different types you can work with. Now what we can do is we can actually have multiple navigation menus, and we can add them to the sites separately. Okay, so we can, for example, have our front-end team leverage a secondary navigation menu and embed it on the bottom of the page, or we can have different pages displaying different navigation menus that may have different sets of pages. We now have more control over how our sites are displaying our pages. Okay, so we'll see some examples of that as we continue on as well. Okay, all right, so just to recap for this section, assets are going to be content types in a site, and we talked about those different content types: web content, documents and media, blogs, polls, etc. Okay. There are a number of different kinds of assets on the platform, and the asset framework allows us to manage, organize, and present these assets in a consistent manner. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and in our next video create some base sites to work with for the Livingston Hotels and Resorts, so that we can go ahead and start creating and managing content and looking at some of those strategies together. All right, so stick around for the next video, and we'll go ahead and create our Livingston sites.